And we'll be starting up here in a few minutes. About one more minute, we'll be starting up here.
Okay.
We'll give folks another 20, 30 seconds to get themselves logged in, then we'll get started.
Somebody has raised their hand.
I wonder why. If you want to open up the Q&A and put in your question, we can help you out, Greg. And we'll go ahead and get started. Tim, you ready?
Sure.
Okay, good morning. And my name is David Orr. I'm the director here with the LTAP Center in New York State, the Cornell Local Roads program. And I want to welcome you to one of our webinars. This particular webinar is on equipment and managing your fleet. Things certainly have changed in the last few years and probably will continue to change. If you open up the Q&A pod down at the bottom, that's where you can get good information and send us questions. We'll try to answer them as we go along. Tim may or may not ask you to raise your hands, but that's up to Tim.
Just jump in, please.
Yep, this session is not worth a PDH, just for those who are wondering, but it is still actually pretty dang valuable because all of us have equipment. Tim Hunt, who is going to be our speaker for the next hour, is with Lewis County. And before that, he was with Cazenovia for how many years?
15.
15 years with the town. And before that, weren't you on the board?
I was. I've been almost 30 years involved in town or county government.
Yep. And then you were with Georgetown for a short period of time, the town of Georgetown. So with that, I will let him take it away. And again, put your questions in.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it very much. Do you have some poll questions you're going to ask, David?
Yeah, we can do the polls. Sure.
Yes.
Let me pull those polls up. Poll number 1. I didn't do a thing. Watch this. It's amazing. No hands. Who do you work for? Let's see who people work for. We've got a mixture, it looks like. We got town, county, city or village, couple of state and fed. Cool. Okay. Nobody working for the weekend today, Tim. They're all actually out there serious hard work, and that's good to see. Okay.
County folks.
And then let's see what your job is. Okay, we got so far mostly engineers. Got a field crew person and none of the above. If you type in none of the above, open up the Q&A and put in there what your position is. That helps us a little bit in terms of what your role is. So hold on a second. Let's see if anybody puts in the Q&A what their role is. I haven't seen it yet. Okay, so about half engineers and half other, one field crew. So, okay, and then years in the position. And we've got a couple who are 11 to 20. We've got 1 to 2. And we got one person who's less than a year, Tim. So They're brand new.
Okay.
Hopefully no, we got two of them now. So two of each.
We
And
transportation analyst with us as well. So.
yeah. And we have a transportation analyst for the position. Okay. So there you go.
Great.
I
Thank you.
think that's it for polls. That helps a lot. And have fun, folks. I'll be on the background too.
All right. Thank you. As David said, my name is Tim Hunt. I'm the County Highway Superintendent for Lewis County and have been in this role for 3 years. And prior to that, I was with the town of Cazenovia as the highway superintendent. I was the town supervisor. I've been on the town board, been involved in government since I got out of college, and been doing this pretty much my entire career. My background is my degree is in economics. And so when I started to get involved in the highway departments, I really wanted to try to understand how to manage a fleet and do it efficiently. And I want to talk to you a little bit about why I think that's so important. The whys I think are hugely important, but what happens is we go to our boards and we ask for a certain amount of money every year. And right now is budget season, so it's a perfect time to talk about this. And we sit down in that budget conversation and they agree to give us money. We then take that money and we essentially spend it on three things. We buy equipment, we pay for labor, we have employees, and then we buy materials. And those three things come together for us to create good roads. That's our job. And any way you look at any of your expenses, they're going to fall into one of those categories. And we break it all down into different groups, but that's really what we're looking for. Now, the challenge is we all know we don't have enough money to do everything that we'd like to do. So if we can control our costs in one particular area, it's going to help us in another. But I want to talk to you about some of the current challenges. I've been doing equipment management for a long time, and the world has changed dramatically in the last year. We're seeing longer lead times on equipment. I'm ordering equipment now 2 to 3 years out. That has been a huge challenge. Right now, to buy a plow truck, to buy a dump truck, I'm ordering it now for fourth quarter 2025. So we're looking at very long lead times, and that creates some challenges both from a procurement perspective, but also from a legislative perspective. Trying to get your legislators to approve purchases that far in advance becomes challenging. We have price uncertainty. I'm ordering things that I don't know how much it's going to cost when they come in, because we're 2 years out. They can't guarantee you a particular price. If there's a change in admission standards, for example, or contracts sometimes aren't even in place 2 years out. So price uncertainty has been a huge issue. We're looking at unusually high inflation on equipment. It's the worst I've ever seen it in my career. We're looking at the last plow truck I just ordered was $330,000, and literally 2 years ago I was buying trucks for $280,000. So we're looking at 30% inflation right off the top, and that's hard to manage. We're looking at rapid changes in technology on all of our equipment. They're developing and changing the technology so quickly that you buy a piece of equipment and the very next year you buy the same piece of equipment and it's completely different just because of the technology that's embedded into it. And we can talk a little bit more about that. And feel free to ask any questions as we're going through this. We're also seeing a lot of quality control issues. We're buying new equipment and we're having to spend 3-4 months working out some of the issues with it, whether it's software updates or technological issues. So a lot of the equipment's being delivered and it's not quite ready to be used. So we're seeing some quality control issues. We're also seeing labor issues, both internally and externally. I'm supposed to say externally, it says internally twice, but so I'm struggling to hire employees, which has an impact. And also we're seeing the vendors that we deal with struggling, whether it's mechanics or qualified people to work on this stuff. So both of those are having some impacts. I just recently downsized my fleet. I got rid of another truck because I just don't have the employees to keep them fully utilized, and there's no sense paying for that truck without the employees to utilize it. So our plan must adjust to these realities. So every year things change. This year, and since COVID, we've had a large number of changes happening to the equipment programs, but we have to learn to adapt. And what does the next iteration of an equipment program look like given all of these realities? So there's a lot going on. So what I do is I try to look at what are the percentages of equipment, materials, and labor in my budget. As I mentioned, we spend money on three things. This is actually my budget here in Lewis County. I have $8.7 million. About 28% of that goes to labor, about 11% goes to equipment, and about 61% goes to material. What I know is if I go to my board and I say, I need to get more work done and I would like $11 million, the chances are very slim that we're going to get that, right? The pie is generally not going to get significantly bigger. We might be able to get 2% growth on our budget, but overall, your budgets are not going to increase dramatically. Very few legislators like to increase taxes. So how do we get more done? We need to make sure that we're being efficient in all three of these areas. We need to manage our labor. We need to manage our equipment costs so that it's as efficient as possible, and we need to manage our materials. And we also need to manage all three of them so they're in balance with each other. There's no sense having labor that doesn't have the right equipment, and there's no sense having equipment with nobody to operate it. So we need to make sure that all of these are working together in harmony. And I'm not suggesting that that is the proper ratio either. I'm just showing you that that's what the ratio is in my situation. And I monitor that every year to see as it changes and, depending on how I structure things in my department. So why manage that fleet? If the pie isn't going to increase, how would you change the individual slices to improve your roads? Equipment expenses reduce the money available for labor and material. Obviously, if your equipment expenses rise, you got to take it from somewhere else. Equipment should match your labor. More equipment than employees versus more employees than equipment. If you have 3 employees and 3 plow trucks, that makes sense. But if you have 5 plow trucks and 3 employees, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Some key concepts: right size your fleet, buy the right equipment, maintain an accurate inventory, including usage of your equipment. Consider how your equipment affects your labor productivity. And I always give the example of, would you rather have 5 employees with chainsaws out cutting brush beside the road, or 1 in a boom mower that can clear miles of road in the same amount of time? So one piece of capital equipment can change very dramatically your labor productivity. Keep equipment properly maintained. Consider purchase price and disposal price when you're buying things. A lot of people tend to think about what it costs them, and what their true cost is their cost of purchase minus what they were able to sell it for when they got rid of it. And I'll show you that's a really important concept here in a few minutes. Right size your fleet. This is a tough one, but often we take our jobs in a highway department and there's a fleet that already exists. And so we just work with that. And I suggest that you don't do that, that you don't start with what you have, but start with what would you consider the ideal fleet. Scratch everything off, start with a blank sheet of paper and go, if I could design my own fleet, this is exactly what it would look like. Consider your labor productivity in that equation. Would you rather have a piece of equipment or an employee? And people say, well, I'd like both. Oftentimes they see highway superintendents asking for both. I need more people and I need more equipment. Well, the reality is they both cost roughly the same when you get down to it. Your hourly rate for an employee and your hourly commitment for capital purchase of a piece of equipment is going to be similar. So, if you were to get one or the other, which one is going to enhance your productivity more? And oftentimes people don't think about this, but when we add employees and we don't add equipment, are we getting the most efficiency out of that employee if they don't have the proper pieces of equipment they need to make their job productive? All equipment has an hourly cost. You wouldn't hire a full-time employee to work 20 hours per week. And I see this all the time. When I started here, we had a loader. If you take a full-size loader, it's, the hourly cost of owning that loader is very similar to the cost of an employee. It's somewhere around $40, $50 an hour for that loader. And we kept it in a quarry, and we used it about 10 to 12 hours a year. Well, there's absolutely no way you can justify the capital expenditure for that short period of time. So you want to be mindful of that as well. So buy the right equipment. Quality versus price. This is a huge conversation all the time. Don't look at initial purchase price. Look at what's the right piece that's going to do the job for you. Productivity is very important. Parts and service availability, uptime, all of these things need to be factored in when you're purchasing something. Maintain an accurate inventory, including your usage of your equipment. How many hours per year justifies ownership? And only you can answer that. But I would suggest you put how much, whether it's hours or miles for each piece of equipment that you have. And I would start to look at the very bottom of that list, the ones that are not being used very much each year, and make a decision whether you can justify owning that, or if it would make sense to rent it, or you could change your operations to not need it. And then your high utilization pieces, obviously it makes a lot of sense. Have current rental rates. Every year I get all the rental rates this time of year when I'm putting my budget together. So I know I can compare the cost of ownership versus the cost of rental. And in some cases, it makes a lot more sense to rent. For example, roadside mowers, boom mowers can often be cheaper to rent than they can be to own, depending on how many months a year you want to use that particular piece of equipment. And can you schedule things differently? Oftentimes we want to use it when we want to use it. Well, if we choose to schedule properly, maybe we don't need as much or as many pieces of equipment. Shared services with your towns or counties, making sure that different towns own different pieces of equipment. For example, here in Lewis County, we own a shoulder machine, and we put shoulders on for all of our towns. It doesn't make sense for every town to own a shoulder machine when it only gets used for 3 or 4 days a year in each town. Well, we can own one and then go around and do all the towns. So we try to look at that. Bucket trucks, things that maybe aren't being utilized all the time, but how does it make sense to do that as a shared service? Consider how equipment affects labor productivity. Look at your annual work process and labor involved. I track all of our labor hours, and I look to see how many hours we spend cutting brush, how many hours we spend digging ditches, how many hours we do each of our processes, and then say, if we were to change the piece of equipment using, could I get more ditches cleaned, or could I get more brush cut if I had a different piece of equipment? So I try to look at our labor and how we're using it. A real common one you see in a town is a lot of towns are ditching with a backhoe versus a great awl versus an excavator. When I was consulting for a town, they had a backhoe and they had 2 employees, and I actually set them out to dig a ditch, and I timed them. And I said, how many feet of ditch got cleaned in an 8-hour day? And then looked at each of these pieces to see which one was more effective for that particular process. Brush with a chainsaw versus with a boom mower, another example of productivity and labor. And are there pieces that can be used for multiple things? So we're in a situation where these are large capital purchases, and we want to get as high a utilization as possible. So it often makes sense to look at things that can be used for multiple job functions. For example, buying a front end loader to load a truck, but buying it with a quick attach and then having forks for it, having a broom for it, having multiple pieces so that you can reduce that one capital expenditure and make it more valuable in a lot of different ways. So try to look at pieces as a Swiss Army knife, and how can I get the most different uses from that piece? Keep your equipment properly maintained. Do not defer your maintenance. This is a big one, and I'll tell you what I've done here, and it caused a little bit of heartburn. But what ends up happening is in the summertime, we're all busy and we're out doing field work, and there's nothing available to be maintained. So they don't do any maintenance throughout the summertime. And I have actually scheduled 2 trucks every day for maintenance. So Everybody gets assigned their job just like normal, but two of them know that on Monday, it's their turn for their trucks to be maintained. So they pull their trucks in, and for an hour, they work with the mechanics and they grease the truck. They go over it, make sure everything's working correctly. And if it needs anything, the mechanics can order it. And then as soon as it comes in, they can get it put on that truck. So we actually schedule the preventative maintenance throughout the year, irregardless of what season it is, because it's easy to say, well, we can't take it down right now and work on it. Well, you're fooling yourself. You're going to do it sooner or later. So schedule for your uptime, use your downtime wisely. When, for example, in the summertime, we're trying to service and repair all of our winter equipment. In the winter, we're trying to do all of our summer equipment. We make sure our mowers are all ready to go by spring. So, we do a more thorough maintenance in obviously the downtimes. Think about your resale value on your equipment. Maintaining it, washing it, keeping it in good condition is very important, so that when you get ready to sell that and replace it, you can get the maximum resale value. And you have to look at those things, right? I have a truck right now, an older truck. It was pre-emissions and it blew a head on it, and we got the price to repair it was $30,000. And that $30,000, we looked at what would the truck be worth if we sold it as is, and what would the truck be worth if we did all of this work and then sold it. And we had to make a decision whether to repair it or to just sell it and get rid of it. In this particular case, we didn't feel that repairing it was going to add enough value to justify it, so we just got rid of the truck. So make sure you're thinking about your resale value when you're spending the money on these pieces of equipment. Safety is a top priority. I refuse to allow any vehicle or piece of equipment to be used if all of the safety features are not working correctly. I don't care if we can't get a job done because the piece isn't available, then we can't do the job. But to send an employee out there and ask them to do this when a piece of equipment is not functioning properly is, in my opinion, foolhardy, because you're going to end up with a lawsuit and somebody getting hurt, and it's just not worth it. Consider purchase price and disposal, buy right and sell right. Use your municipal discounts. And that's what I mean about buy right and sell right. You need to understand what's happening in the market. So for example, I can buy certain pieces of equipment, excavators, things that are going to go out into the private market. I can use my municipal discounts, buy those pieces of equipment, hold on to them for 2 years, 3 years, a fairly short period of time, and then turn around and resell that into the private market and make very good money on it. And it helps to absorb some of the depreciation of that piece of equipment. So those you can turn around even faster. So you got to know what the right time to buy and sell all of these pieces are. Buy something that others want, not just what you want. And the example I always give with that is when we used to buy pickup trucks off of state contract, and they had crank windows and they had no differential lock, no radio, no air conditioning, and they were pretty inexpensive pickups, but no one wanted that pickup. You couldn't sell that to the private market if you tried. So does that make sense? And what you'll look at is if you buy a pickup truck and hold it for a couple of years and it's one that your average person would like to buy, you can actually do better by buying a nicer truck and then reselling it into the private market. Know when to replace. Don't keep your equipment too long, and keep accurate maintenance records, maintenance programs. There's all sorts of stuff to help you keep these records now. A computerized maintenance program, AVLs, automatic vehicle locators, basically GIS type activity where you can keep track of the vehicles, the hours, the mileage, and all of the maintenance. You want to understand your purchase price plus all of the maintenance you've done to that vehicle, and that will help you to understand your cost of ownership and your percentage of uptime. So those are all records that are really important to keep so that you can understand and collect enough data to do what's called life cycle costing on all of your equipment. NPV, your life cycle costing, is your capital cost which is your acquisition minus your disposal. And a lot of people think capital cost is just your purchase price. It's not. It's your purchase price minus your disposal, plus any repairs that you've done divided by the lifespan of that piece of equipment. That's how you get that. Now, let me lay some groundwork here. You got to keep good records of all repairs associated with each piece of equipment so that you can do this. You want to keep replacement value updated annually for every piece of equipment. Do an annual report on the cost of operation for each piece of equipment. And operating costs should decrease every single year. When it starts to increase, you should replace it. This is the key component to managing your program right there. Operating costs should decrease every year. And when they start to increase, you should replace it. Now, let me just show you what that looks like mathematically. So if you were to take a plow truck and you bought it for $250,000 and you own it for 12 months, your cost of ownership would be $250,000. On your second year, you have the $250,000 and you do $1,000 of repair work to that truck divided by 2 years of ownership. Your repair or your cost of ownership is now $125,000. It's actually $125,500 because half of the $1,000. That's a typo. On your third year, you still have your $250,000 worth of ownership plus the $1,000, plus you put in $2,000 plus $1,000 from the prior year. You divide that by 3, and your cost of ownership is now $84,000. It continues to go down. Your cost of ownership is getting cheaper. On your fourth year, $250,000 plus $3,000, which is the total of the prior years, plus you put another $2,000 into it, and you divide that by 4 years, it goes to $63,000. It's going down. But at some point, it's going to hit the bottom right here on year 8, and then it's going to start to go back up. So in year 8, it was $43,125. Year 9, it became $43,333. It's at that moment you want to sell that truck because that is your lowest cost of ownership that you will ever have for that piece of equipment right there. Now, let me show you what that looks like graphically. So this is a depreciation curve, $250,000. You buy the plow truck. You own that plow truck for 12 years, and at some point, the truck becomes worthless. This is your repair cost, your repair curve, and the first year you own it, it costs you literally nothing to own it. The second year, you put a little money into it. The third year, a little more, and your costs of repair start to go up. When your depreciation curve and your repair curve cross, that is that place right there. That's your lowest cost of ownership. So that is, if we went back a slide, that point right there. That is the bottom of those two curves. Where the two curves cross, that's the bottom of that curve right there. So that is what you're trying to manage. That's what you're trying to do right there, is try to keep your equipment right in that sweet spot. So that's how we try to manage the program. That's called NPV, or life cycle costing, your capital cost plus your repair cost divided by your lifespan. Capital cost equals acquisition cost minus disposition value. Additional considerations is your disposition value or your disposal costs. If you take a plow truck and you pay $250,000 and you hold it until it's scrap, and that truck is worth $8,000 for scrap value, that truck costs you $242,000 to own. If you took the same plow truck at $250,000 and you sold it when it was worth $125,000, so halfway through its life, that truck now costs you $125,000 to own, if that makes sense. And we'll add that in with repair costs, and you'll start to see that it does not make sense to own a piece of equipment until it is completely junk. So our goal is to minimize equipment costs by focusing on that life cycle costing, capital cost plus repair costs divided by lifespan. We want to maximize our resale value. We want to minimize our repair costs. And this is an actual depreciation schedule for a plow truck that I put together a number of years ago. So the purchase price was like $220,000. And then over time, that truck ultimately became junk. So somewhere here in the middle, somewhere around year 7 through 10 is like about halfway down that curve. And you can also do the same thing with your repair costs. And there's all sorts of tools to kind of control this curve. So for example, you can buy extended warranties. That'll flatten that curve out to a point where then it will start to rise. A lot of equipment companies now are selling programs where when you buy a 5-year program, it includes the filters, the oil changes, and any repair costs. So you can get an extended warranty plus maintenance program. The reason they're doing that is because more and more people are focusing on what is my cost of ownership or my cost of operation, not just what I purchased the piece of equipment for. So that helps them to control this in the period of time when they own it. So all sorts of tools that you can do to help manage this curve. What I will tell you is both of these curves, and this is kind of an important concept, this curve has gotten much steeper. There was a time when you could buy a plow truck for $100,000 and you could use it for 25 years. That's a pretty flat curve. Also, this curve used to be very flat as well. Guys could do most of the work themselves on this equipment. It was not extremely expensive, and it was a fairly flat curve. But both of these curves have gotten steeper and steeper as technology has gotten involved. Now with all of the emission stuff, with all the electronics, we often can't do a lot of that repair work, and the parts are extremely expensive. If anybody's replaced an exhaust system on a truck with the emissions, you'll see that this is much, much steeper. So now we're dealing with very steep repair curves and very steep depreciation curves, and it becomes that much more important to pay attention to this because this curve and this curve have gotten very, very steep. And I anticipate them to continue to get steeper as we go. Want to show you what this looks like in an actual scenario. This is a plow truck that I actually purchased way back in 2006. So it's a little bit older, but it gives me the full life cycle of the truck, and it gives you a little bit of an idea of what we're looking at. I paid $164,599 for this truck in 2006. Now, if you can imagine, I just ordered this same truck for $330,000 right now. So that gives you an idea of what the inflation has been over that period of time. Sold that truck in 2013 for $109,000. All important information. So the capital cost was $55,599. That was our actual capital, or $7,943 per year because we owned the truck for 7 years. So that same truck, if I had bought it and kept it for 20 years, $164,599 divided by 20 would cost me $8,230 per year. See how it was cheaper to hold it, buy it, and hold it for 7 years? It was actually cheaper than it was to keep it for 20. And people don't understand or misunderstand that concept all the time, because you will see communities that buy a plow truck and then keep it for 20 years and think that's the cheapest thing that they can do for their community, and it's often not. So I want to show you what the actual cost of ownership or operation for that truck was. So during that 7-year period, it had a warranty for the most of its life for 5 years. And then the remaining 7 years, the remaining 2 years, we had to take care of anything that went wrong with it. So we had a water pump go, a steering assist cylinder, a radiator repair, a U-joint, and an air valve, a coolant tube rusted out, and an air solenoid. This was the cost of the parts. I took the estimated labor of our employees putting it on. At the time, the burden rate of labor was $26 an hour. So we came up with labor costs over here, and we had $962 in labor. We had $2,217 in parts. So we had $3,179 divided by 7 years is $454 per year for repairs on that truck. So we had our capital cost, we had our repair cost. Now, I can't tell you what it is if you keep the truck forever, because very few people keep records that well. But this is a neighboring town that shared with me a truck that they had bought. They kept it for 20 years. They sold it for $8,000 and it went to a scrap yard. And look at the example of things that they put on it: 10 front tires, 30 rear tires, 10 slack adjusters, 11 wheel spacers, hydraulic oil tank, wing cables, plow cables. They put a new box on it twice. So you start to total that up, you know, it's more than $450 a year in repair costs. So let's talk about our interest expense. In this particular case, and I want to be completely transparent, we had leased this plow truck. So there was an additional cost. There was a cost for interest. The actual interest on the 7 years that we had financed this truck was $14,000 or $2,000 per year. So that 2000 plow truck was $164,000. It was replaced in 2013 for $213,000. That was the inflation rate from 2006 to 2013 on that particular truck. So the inflation was $48,000 a year or $6,965 a year. So if we didn't finance it, so our finance cost was $2,000 a year, well, the interest or the inflation rate was $7,000 a year. So you can see it was much cheaper to borrow the money and purchase it now than it was to try to save the money and purchase it at a future date. The difference between these two numbers is called the future value of money, and it's important to understand that. This right now in our conditions where interest rates are rising needs to be considered very carefully. We might want to pay cash for this truck now because the time value of money is much higher. So NVP life cycle costing on this particular truck, our capital was $7,943 a year. Repairs were $454. Interest was $2,060 per year. So our total cost of operation of that plow truck for a 7-year period was $10,457 per truck. That's how you get to your total cost of operation, which is what you want to try to figure out for every piece of equipment you have. I'm going to tell you that this number is just about doubled right now. So around $20,000 per plow truck is going to be your total cost of operation right now. So that gives you a little idea of how you do it. The benefits of doing this is you're hedging against inflation. Interest rates are lower than the rate of inflation, or they have been for a long time. We may rethink whether we want to lease or whether we want to use capital to buy these pieces of equipment. That's an important thing to consider as our world changes and as things change in the world. We want to leverage the depreciation, sell a vehicle when it has its maximum residual value, which is part of the curves that I showed you. We want to create cost predictability, one budget number every year instead of the constant change. What I see a lot in municipalities is they might not purchase anything on year 1, 2, or 3, but then year 4, they might spend $500,000. Well, that's really hard to budget for that type of stuff, where if you take the same number and you divide it over the 5 years and say, let's just budget $1 million a year, will that work? And you can certainly do that. And that's what this is all designed to do, is come up with a program where you can have a single budget number every year. And I would ask each of you to try to figure out what that number is. If you had a certain amount every single year to keep your fleet in top shape, what would that number be? It helps predict and control your cost of use, and it gives your legislators an opportunity to budget properly. You want to minimize your repair costs. Newer equipment means less hours in repair. In my particular case here in Lewis County, we went from 5 mechanics to 2 because we have less repairs. We're not rebuilding engines and doing a lot of repair work. We're really just doing service work and maintenance work now. Better equipment means more efficient use of our labor and materials. As we mentioned, we need less equipment to operate with, and we have less breakdowns. So that's a key one, right? And I talk to people all the time about that, is when you're out beside the road and you've got 10 trucks there. You've got, and the example I gave is we were cutting shoulders one day, and we had the road grader, we had a broom to sweep the road afterwards, we had the force feed loader to pick the dirt up, we had a roller to roll the shoulders in, and then we had like 10 trucks helping us. So we had 15 people out there plus flaggers, 16, 17 people in this operation, and we're going to go and cut shoulders. We get out there and we blow a hydraulic hose, and the crew comes to a standstill. It's going to be an hour and a half to go to the shop, get the hose, come back, put it on the piece of equipment, and get going again. So what did that $100 hydraulic hose cost us in labor productivity with 15 people standing around for an hour or two? So you got to look at the cost of these breakdowns a little bit differently as well. It helps you to be more efficient by keeping your fleet up to date and in good condition. And it's obviously much safer. Every year, every piece of equipment that we get has more and more safety features on them. And whether it's backup cameras, and now they have smart sensors so that, if, the new loaders, if somebody walks in its pathway, it actually stops. Irregardless if you're trying to move it, it'll actually stop if it senses a person that you're going to back over. So all of that stuff is making the equipment much more safe to be around. Requirements: you must buy the right equipment. You constantly have to be researching what is the right thing for your program and for your fleet. You must take care of your equipment, maintain it so that you can get your maximum resale value. You must eliminate excess equipment, i.e. right-size the fleet. This is probably one of the hardest things that I ask people to do. When I got here to Lewis County 3 years ago, I downsized our fleet by 19 pieces of equipment within the first couple months. What that did is it got me a lot of cash to help me start to buy the new equipment. And it also showed my legislators that I was serious about actually having a program, that I wasn't just going to keep letting the fleet get bigger and bigger and not pay attention to what it costs to operate. It helps the upfront buy-in, and it lets your hours of use make a determination. And what I did, the reason I downsized it is I looked at our hours of use on equipment. And when we had very, very low usage, we had pieces of equipment sitting around that were being used maybe once a year. That stuff went away. We figured out a different way to do it, or we rented it. We just felt we didn't need to have it. So you must stick with a plan. It requires buy-in from your legislative board. If you keep it too long, it loses its value. The biggest risk we all have in putting these programs together is you might get a legislative board that's all for it, and then there's an election and half of them leave, and we have a new legislative board and they're, nope, throw it out. And then all of a sudden, everything that you've done to get your program going starts to fall apart. And that's where there's some ways that you can manage that, whether it's through leasing. That's one of the ways that I like to do it, because now you can't necessarily stop the program, but they have a budget number that's fixed each and every year, and they know exactly what the costs are. So every year when you're going in front of them, all you're looking to do is replace that particular lease that year. And everything just kind of rolls on, irregardless of a major shift in your legislative group. Some pros and cons of a program like this: it's not for everyone. It is a lot of work. You want to keep track of all of these records. Your bookkeeper, your clerk, your board, your attorney, the highway superintendent, everybody must be working together, pulling in the same direction. Your town board and your highway superintendent must work together, and that is not always the case, as many of you know. Sometimes your highway department and your boards are not on the same page, and I can tell you I would never try to implement this if you're not. So try to make sure that you're working with your board. It requires constant vigilance. Equipment condition, market forces change, as I just mentioned, since COVID. All of this has changed. Everything has changed. It's had me questioning a lot of the decisions and a lot of the program, and making tweaks to it to adapt to the changes that are happening in the market right now. Some observations: Relationships between your board and your highway department are critical. I have yet to go into a highway department where there is tension between the highway department and its legislative group and see a program that works well. When I go in and see a program that's working well, there's usually a very good relationship between those two groups. So focus on that relationship, and you'll use this as a tool to improve that relationship. Because talking about this is really healthy between your legislators and yourself. Talking about what your real needs are and how you're going to get them done is a really healthy conversation. Your program should be a group effort with no one person solely responsible. I try to create some divisions so that if something were to happen to me, this program could continue on. So it's important to get a few people involved in your department and legislatively so that there's lots of people that are in the know of what you're doing. The program should continue regardless of who holds office, and you should have a long-range plan that everyone works from. I actually have a budget meeting this week with my county manager and legislative group, and I'm not presenting this year's budget. I'm presenting him with 5 years of budget. I actually had to present 20 years budgets and show them exactly, this is what my long-term equipment program is. This is what my long-term labor plan is. And this is what my long-term highway plan is. So I try to look long range on all of this, and that helps to get the picture out there. It's not about a particular piece of equipment. It's about how we're managing our department. How to start? I would start with an annual inventory and your current replacement value of all your equipment. I like to do some high-level analysis. For example, if you have 36 pieces of equipment valued at $60 million, and you know they're going to each last 10 years, that means you need $3.6 million to be even in the ballpark, right? Just rough numbers. And if you could do that for less, that would be even better. So you can start with some high-level analysis and start to work into the details in a much deeper way. So that is all I have. I know we're about 15 minutes ahead of schedule, which is great. If anybody has any questions, please type them into the chat box, and I'd be glad to answer them.
The Q&A, you need the chat, put your questions in, but that's okay.
I think we got 12 people on here. You could open it up, David.
Yeah, if somebody wants, I'm going to lower everybody's hands. If you want to talk, we could actually open it up. You can talk, ask your question that way. Just raise your hand. So either raise your hand and I'll let you talk, or put it in the Q&A. I did have a question for you, Tim.
All right.
You didn't mention it. Or if you did, I didn't catch it. Hang on. What department would be managing these decisions is the question for you.
Okay. And I'm not sure what department what agency you work for, but in a town, those decisions would be a joint decision between the highway department, the highway superintendent, and the town board. On a county level, it's a decision between me as the highway superintendent and my county manager when we're preparing our annual budget, and often needs approval and ratification from our legislators. So the way we do it is once I've got a plan, we put it in the budget. I actually present to my legislative committee annually on the equipment plan, and then they adopt that plan. So it's never one department's decision, it's multiple. And that's where having good data and being able to communicate well is important, because we need everybody to work together on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Tim, the question I had for you, what do you think is going to change as we move to more quote unquote green vehicles, electric, natural gas, maybe for a short period, hybrid?
There's a number of things. The one I'm most concerned with, David, is the actual capital cost. And what's happening is, I believe the economies of scale, particularly for towns, is changing very rapidly. So at one time, you could have a small town with a very small tax base and maybe 30 miles of road, and they could afford to have a couple plow trucks and a pickup and a loader. But as we're seeing the cost of this new technology come out, um, there's a question of how big a town has to be in business, right? The economies of scale are changing as the capital requirements are going up. And that's the biggest concern I have. I mean, we can get into the weeds about, is the technology going to work in the cold weather? And generally over time, all of those technical issues get sorted out. But the capital cost of actually doing this wholesale change is going to be significant, and it's going to restructure our local governments, I'm afraid. So that's my little spiel.
And how do you account for sharing vehicles in your overall equipment plan? Because all towns, villages, and counties do that statewide. They have to.
Yes, I actually do not build it into my program. I look at sharing as just part of my operations. So if I need a piece of equipment, I don't look at just what my needs are, but what my needs might be in sharing with other towns. For example, I mentioned a shoulder machine. If I was looking at a shoulder machine to own just for my purposes as the county highway superintendent, it would be hard to justify that. But looking at it and owning it on behalf of myself and the towns, it makes a lot of sense. So I just kind of build that into the operations.
Okay. I just was wondering, our take usually is that if you're sharing with others, you count that sharing time as part of your overall cost. So if, for instance, you're doing a chip seal with 15 trucks and you're only supplying 5, you need to actually account for 15 trucks because you're going to be sending those trucks out later on as a
Yes.
trade.
Yep.
So,
and I will say one of the things that's happened recently is I'm down 4 people. I'm having a hard time hiring staff right now. And so are the days of us trucking a lot of material, like hauling stone from the quarry. If I do that, which I can, now I don't have people doing some other things that I think are really important, like cutting shoulders and digging ditches. So I'm starting to contract for more hauling so that I can redeploy my troops to the things that only we can do, the more essential things.
well, that was the last question I had for you, and that is, what do you think is changing in terms of workforce? Because we know getting folks is being harder, training people for CDL is being harder. So
now on the flip side of that, the trucks are getting easier to drive too. So they're automatic. They're it's easy to drive really as a car with disc brakes and automatic transmissions and some of the things that are happening out there. They've become easier to drive, but it's harder to find employees to drive them and operate them.
and the maintenance on them changes quite a bit when you go to that.
And that's probably been one of the biggest challenges in the last year that I've seen is not only our staff's inability to take care, to fix these, but to even the dealerships having qualified mechanics to work on them. I have a new plow truck that we took possession of about 4 months ago, and no one can work on it. I mean, we have probably sent 10 requests into engineering because the problem we're having with it is software related. It's not a physical issue. We spec the truck just like the truck prior, but what's happening is there's all sorts of sophisticated software that's controlling the emissions and controlling shift points, and it's limiting the performance of the vehicle. And so now we've got engineers from, the Allison transmission engineers talking to the Daimler Chrysler engineers and going, well, your software is telling the engine to do this, and our transmission software is doing this, and they're not working together well, and we've got to get a software update to fix it. So way above any mechanic's pay grade at your dealership or at your local highway department. And that's really been a huge change, huge fundamental change.
Okay. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A, and don't see any point in just sitting around. So we're going to let everybody go a few minutes early, but I don't think anybody will complain.
If anyone has questions, David, they can email me directly or email, they'll forward it to me from Cornell,
Right.
Local Roads, and I'll be glad to share my presentation.
And we'll be posting the video here and your stuff on our website. So with that, everybody have yourself a great day. And it looks like it's going to be a good day out there and rain later in the week. So get your work done and everybody take care. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
One more webinar to go. Bye-bye.